Chapter 1. The spiral begins. I bet you didn't know this. The quiet kid next door, the one you'd barely notice, was not just shy. He was a universe of dark thoughts contained within a placid exterior. Jeffrey Dahmer's story doesn't begin with the headlines. It begins in the silent, lonely corridors of his own mind. From a young age, a profound sense of isolation set him apart. While other children played, Dahmer was drawn to a more solitary, macabre hobby: collecting and dissecting roadkill. This wasn't just a boy's morbid curiosity. It was the seed of a terrifying obsession with anatomy, with the internal, with what lies beneath the surface. It was the first step in a chilling journey from curiosity to compulsion. He was fascinated by the mechanics of life and death, a fascination that would later twist into a desire for complete control over another human being. This early behavior was a red flag, a silent scream in the quiet landscape of his youth. But it went unnoticed, dismissed as the strange pastime of an awkward boy. The disconnect between his inner world and the one outside was growing, creating a chasm that would soon be filled with unspeakable acts. He hid a shocking double life, a life where fantasy and reality began to blur. The spiral from curiosity to obsession was faster than anyone expected. It started small, with social awkwardness that made forming genuine connections impossible. This inability to connect fueled his retreat into a rich but dangerous fantasy life. These weren't just daydreams. They were detailed, rehearsed scenarios of dominance and control. He craved companionship but was terrified of rejection, a paradox that led him to a horrifying conclusion. If a person couldn't leave, he wouldn't have to face being alone. This internal logic began to demand an outlet. The boundary pushing started subtly, testing the limits of social norms, but quickly escalated. His fantasies hardened into a terrifying resolve. The first murder in 1978 was a catastrophic crossing of the Rubicon. It was clumsy, panicked, but it set a precedent. It proved to him that his darkest thoughts were possible. After a long pause, the compulsion returned, stronger and more refined. The escalation into violence was no longer a question of if, but when. His apartment became his laboratory, a place to turn his horrifying fantasies into actions, a private kingdom where he was the absolute ruler. Chapter 2. The hunting grounds. Who were his victims? They were sons, brothers, and friends. Mostly young, vibrant men, often from minority communities, simply trying to live their lives. He met them in the places where people go to connect: bustling gay bars, bus stops, or just walking down the street. He frequented specific neighborhoods, creating a hunting ground where he felt comfortable and his targets were plentiful. The pattern was chillingly consistent. It began with charm. Dahmer, despite his awkwardness, could project a disarming, non-threatening image. He was lonely, he'd say, and just wanted some company. He'd offer money for photos or a drink back at his place. It was a carefully constructed lure, designed to exploit a person's kindness or their need for a little cash. He presented himself as harmless, a friend for the evening. This mask of normalcy was his most effective weapon. It allowed him to get close, to bypass the natural defenses we all have. He was a predator who understood the social contract and how to manipulate it for his own terrifying ends. The promise of a friendly conversation or a few dollars was a small price for a moment of connection, a price his victims were tragically willing to pay, unaware of the final cost. The next stage of the pattern was isolation. The goal was always the same: get them back to his apartment, to his space, where he held all the power. Once the door was locked, the mask of the friendly, lonely man would fall away, replaced by an unnerving focus. The final and most crucial element was control. This was the core of his entire pathology. Dahmer's ultimate fantasy was to create a compliant partner, a living zombie who would never leave him. He experimented with horrific methods to achieve this, drugging his victims to render them unconscious. This desire for total control, born from a pathological fear of abandonment, was the driving force behind every action he took. It was a desperate, twisted attempt to solve his loneliness, but it only led to a cycle of death and further isolation. Tragically, numerous red flags were missed. Complaints from neighbors about foul odors and strange noises were dismissed. Police even returned a dazed, naked teenager to Dahmer's custody, believing it was a simple domestic dispute. These were not just missed opportunities. They were systemic failures that allowed a monster to continue his reign of terror, leaving a trail of devastation and a community asking how this could have happened. Chapter 3. The House of Horrors. The end came not from a brilliant piece of detective work, but from sheer will to survive. On July 22, 1991, his arrest came after one victim, Tracy Edwards, managed to escape. After being lured to the apartment and handcuffed, Edwards saw his chance. He fought back, broke free, and fled into the night, flagging down a police patrol car. He didn't just report an assault, he told the officers about the strange smells, the knife, and the terrifying feeling that he was not going to leave that apartment alive. His desperate plea was finally enough to get police to take a closer look. When they entered apartment 213 of the Oxford Apartments, the illusion of normalcy was shattered forever. The officers were confronted with a scene of unimaginable horror. The discovery was not a single crime scene, but a museum of death. Polaroids documenting his atrocities, a human head in the refrigerator, skulls, and other remains were scattered throughout the apartment. The full, sickening scope of Dahmer's activities was laid bare. The quiet neighbor was a serial killer, and his apartment was a tomb. The procedural steps that followed were methodical, a stark contrast to the chaos found inside. The building was evacuated, and a painstaking forensic investigation began, cataloging the evidence of at least 11 victims found within those four walls. The courtroom scenes that followed were a national spectacle. The trial was not to determine guilt. Dahmer had confessed in detail, but to decide his sanity. Was he a man driven by an evil he could control, or was he legally insane, a victim of a fractured mind he could not command? The prosecution painted a picture of a meticulous, organized killer who knew right from wrong. The defense argued for a man lost to necrophilia and mental illness, compelled by forces beyond his control. The testimony was grueling. For the first time, the public heard the cold, detached details of the crimes from Dahmer himself, but more importantly, the world heard from the families of the victims. In powerful, heart-wrenching impact statements, they gave voice to the voiceless. They spoke of their sons, their brothers, their friends, not as statistics, but as beloved human beings whose futures were stolen. A country, and indeed the world, was left asking how this went unnoticed for so long. The jury ultimately rejected the insanity plea, finding Dahmer sane and responsible. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would never walk free again. But the verdict couldn't answer the deeper questions that haunted the nation. Chapter 4. Fact versus Fiction. Decades later, the case was thrust back into the spotlight. And the Netflix series? It captivated a new generation, but it also raised difficult questions about the line between storytelling and exploitation. The show, Dahmer Monster: The Jeffrey Dahmer Story, is a dramatization, not a documentary. It takes real events and shapes them into a narrative, which means it dramatizes moments, but in doing so, it often blurs nuance. For the sake of television drama, timelines are compressed. Characters are created as composites, blending the experiences of several real people into one. Conversations are invented to explain motives and fill narrative gaps. For example, the series heavily features his neighbor, Glenda Cleveland, as living next door and repeatedly reporting him. In reality, she lived in an adjacent building, and her heroic efforts were primarily made over the phone. This change creates a more direct, cinematic conflict, but it alters the facts of what happened. The show also speculates on Dahmer's motivations, presenting a psychological portrait that is part fact, part creative interpretation. While compelling, these fictionalized elements can be misleading, presenting a specific version of the truth as the definitive one. So, why does this accuracy matter? Because behind the dramatization are real-life investigations, real survivors, and real victim stories. The true story is found in the police reports, the court transcripts, and the memories of those who were there. The real Tracy Edwards, whose bravery led to the arrest, has a story more powerful than any scripted scene. The real families of the victims have endured a pain that no actor can fully portray. When a story is dramatized, there's a risk of centering the narrative on the killer, making him the complex, fascinating anti-hero. The victims can become narrative devices, their humanity reduced to plot points in the killer's story. The Netflix series was criticized by many of the victims' families for this very reason, stating they were re-traumatized by a show they were never consulted on. They felt their deepest tragedy was turned into entertainment. It's crucial to remember the names: Konarak Synthasamphone, Matt Turner, Jeremiah Weinberger, Oliver Lacey, Joseph Braidhoft, and all the others. They are not characters. They were people. Their stories, and the stories of the survivors, deserve more context, more respect, and more truth than any show can give.